Hello, everyone. I'm Dawn Fackler. I'm with overabundanceoflight.com, and we have another compassionate conversation today. Joining us is Miss Lisa Boone, and I will turn this over to you and let you introduce yourself, and then we will get going.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa Boone. I'm the author of Severed Sacredness, The Miraculous Journey of Jessie Boone. And also, I'm a certified hospice and palliative nurse. And Dawn and I are going to have a conversation today about grief and abundance of life and whatever else comes up our way in our conversation. I'm from Edmond, Oklahoma. And thank you, Dawn, so much for having me here today. I so appreciate the invitation to come and join you with a focus on compassionate conversations.
Thank you for coming. Um, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in. How, Go ahead and give us your story about your daughter, Jessie.
Yes, Jessie Boone is our daughter who had a skiing accident in the year of 2009. She went on a church ski trip to have a lot of fun. She's our only daughter. She was 15. And she tragically hit a tree going down a mountain. She slipped and somehow lost control and hit the forehead of her head on a trunk of an aspen tree, which created this massive brain injury. She was immediately unresponsive and posturing, which is a terrible thing to have happen with a brain injury. Life Flight came and intubated her. There's a beautiful story about how God even had help on the mountain when it happened. And they life flighted her to a level 1 trauma center in Grand Junction, Colorado. And there we spent, her dad and I spent 40 days and 40 nights literally in the high plains wilderness desert in this neuro ICU with her. She ended up having to have both sides of her skull removed due to the massive swelling, and her her eye sockets were crushed and fractured, and she was really unrecognizable. So we went through this incredible, devastating time with her, not knowing if she was going to live, and if she did live, would there be any kind of quality of life? And that threw our whole family into, as you can imagine, a catastrophic um, grief journey of unknowing and the fear that came with that, and then the navigation of all of the healthcare systems that we have spent years in, to all of the healthcare staff, to all of the communities of people that responded to us and surrounded us with help when we needed help the worst. This incredible faith journey of going literally through the valley of the shadow of death with a God who is bigger than we could ever imagine. I was able to, several years later, actually write all of these stories and put them into the pages of a book called Severed Sacredness, The Miraculous Journey of Jessie Boone. This book uh, reveals how God is always present, how God always sends help in the darkest of night, how communities and people are incredible to come and bring help and to pray and to carry one so devastated while they cannot carry themselves. It talks about the medical staff and the power the medical staff has in the recovery of one, in how they conduct themselves with the attitudes and the power to see and to hear the one at the bedside and the one in the bed. And then, of course, speaking to the one who has no idea how they're going to survive a devastation, whether it be a tragedy, a divorce, death, a loss of a job, whatever. We all have these things that happen in our life. I mean, God tells us in John 16:33 that we're going to have troubles in this world, and uh, but but we can take heart because he has overcome the world. And so we are not left in this world by ourselves to deal with that. And even though these things may happen to us, that he will be there and help us get through that with this grace that sometimes is hidden. But if you're actually looking um, beneath the obvious awfulness, you can find these tiny little pieces of good. You can focus on these tiny little things that can help you find God. You can begin to recognize how God works through these tragedies and hardships. And so that's the beauty of being able to write all that down in a book to hopefully help people navigate their own darknesses and their own struggles and their own fears and anxieties and tragedies. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me and my story, Dawn.
I know we've talked before. It took you a few years to realize your grief and to acknowledge it. Because I know as healthcare workers, when I see why they don't let us take care of our own family, but you still have the nursing brain. And it's hard to shut that off and actually deal with a mom brain. How did you navigate through that?
You're a mom. You're you're a nurse. There it was a double-edged sword. I mean, to be in the complicated, critical thinking and all of her issues within the healthcare, it was huge for me to be a nurse and to have that experience and knowledge to be able to know what to ask and to understand all of that. But it was also a double-edged sword where I knew too much and I knew the depths of the devastation and the uh, real, the realistic uh, condition of her. And it
The
was hard.
reality, basically the reality of the chances.
Exactly. It was brutal. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to navigate in my life is being a nurse and a devastated mom with a daughter who was so critically injured. And it's not something that you just go, okay, you're going to recover and it's all over. I knew if she would recover, that it would be years of rehabilitation and fighting for every little thing we got back, if we got anything back. I mean, there was a point in time, the mama part of me, was begging God to heal her, but the nurse part of me was begging God to take her because I had cared for loved ones who had not recovered from brain injuries. And uh, life is not good in many of those circumstances. And there is a thing we see in hospice. Dawn, you're in hospice. There is worse things than death. And when you're beginning to look at quality of life, and a 15-year-old daughter who was a 4.0 gymnast, beautiful, healthy, social butterfly, loved God, loved people, was always creating all of these opportunities to gather, and to see her not be able to do any of that. They even at one point, labeled her as a mute, spastic, quadriplegic person. And it was just horrific. And to think about that child spending the rest of her life with none of that
Just laying in bed.
was not something I ever desired or dreamed for my daughter. And I knew, being a woman of great faith, we don't live here. This isn't our home. And I wanted her to be able to be free of that damaged body. I wanted that beautiful spirit that just was incredibly big inside of her to be free from that body that could no longer work if there was not going to be restoration. And so it was a tension I held for a long time as a mom and a nurse. That's a great question, Dawn.
Um, yeah, I can only imagine. I've been through some things with my daughter, but nothing like that. And it's like you said, it's hard to shut off either brain. And it's where do you let your faith take over versus science?
That
Because
was a dance, Dawn. That was a real dance. Faith. And you know, I've never put those two together like you just said that, but faith and medicine are, they go hand in hand. They truly do. And to be able to dance between those two, um, it was powerful, but it was also hard because the reality of trauma to a body that is not, you know, it's not, bodies are fragile. Anything can go wrong with them. And, you know, you talked about the grief and how um, I didn't really grieve. I mean, I grieved because it was so awful, but I didn't really grieve the way had she just immediately died because I was so busy fighting for every little thing, uh, rehab, her life, her breath, her movement, her body, her skincare, all of the prevention of infection, the range of motion, all of the things that you think about with an immobile body and the protection. And so I was so busy protecting her and navigating all of that. I found in this grief that as long as I stayed in the moment and I was focused on right now doing what I could do and what I had the power and the control to do within that, I didn't really focus on all that we had lost. Because if I'd have looked back at all of that we had lost, I would fall into a heap on the ground and I couldn't move. And then when I would begin to go forward and go, what if, and I'd look into the future and the fear of everything that wouldn't be, I would not be able to function. I would just collapse in this heap. And I told myself I cannot live in the past, I cannot live in the future, but I found I could navigate in the moment. And so that was probably my biggest first step was learning how to navigate second by second, moment by moment. And I could actually stay in my body and my body would still connect to my brain as long as I was in that moment. But I didn't really grieve the loss of Jessie as we knew her until I started writing this book. It was interesting that, you know, I didn't have the space, I didn't have the ability. Um, that was not my focus was grief until she got to a place of being a little bit more stable and and things changed then.
the critical became stable versus, yeah. I get what you're saying. Instead of critical, oh no, we could die any minute, it's okay, we're stable, but now where do we go from there? And like you were talking about looking into the future, anticipatory grief is a thing.
So you didn't put that thing in my car.
Um, it's a real thing, and especially for parents who are dealing with, like you said, well, like with your daughter with a traumatic brain injury, or even someone, and I don't want it to sound horrible, but even patients or parents with special needs children. You love them. It's not that you're grieving your child, but you do grieve the dreams that you had for them. And this was basically the same thing. You grieved who she was and who she could have become. Even though you wouldn't change who she is, you love her, but you can still grieve all those hopes and dreams you had for her and the hopes and dreams that she had for herself, because she was at an age she was starting to think about her future and what do you want to be when you grow up. Of course,
Yeah.
I've yet to figure that out, but
I'm still growing up.
so am I. And it fits a lot with hospice because the patient doesn't so much, but the family grieves because they know what's coming.
Yeah, that anticipatory grief is brutal, as these loved ones are in the bed and they know what's coming. You know, with Jess, I still had a junction. I didn't know what was coming, but there was still this hope of recovery. And so I had that focus of recovery. And so in anticipatory grief, I encourage our families just to stay in the moment, to cherish the moment, to do everything you can in each moment, and not to spend any time out here in the anticipatory when this happens, when this happens, when this happens, because that is such a hard place to stay in.
That's a lot of that what if. That what if game is not a good game to play.
Right, and they're missing the preciousness of the time that they do have with their loved one because they're grieving the time they're not going to have with their loved one. And it's an interesting dance between those two things.
And we're all taught to suck it up, buttercup. And well, like you did, you shoved it down. You had things to focus on. And to a point, yes, you kind of need to do that because you do have physical needs that you have to be met. But I guess how would you suggest getting through the grief in the moment and not leaving it shoved down so that I mean, when we think about this nervous system and your somatic body work, your body holds that and it can make you sick. I guess how would you suggest helping be in the moment of grief to work through it and not hold on to it? Kind of
That's,
like the title, let go, letting go.
that's so that's such a big, big question, and there's no right answer to that. I do encourage our families to have people to support them in prayer, to take care of themselves, that rest, eating. It's so important, the holistic part of the body. But I come back always to yes, your loved one is dying, and yes, we are grieving. My own dad died of cancer, and we went through that with him. But the power of staying in the moment and living that moment is probably the biggest gift I could offer someone is if you can stay in the moment and see them, care for them, listen to them, be with them, love them moment by moment, the grief will come when they leave. And then that is this place of, but you're not grieving with regrets. Why didn't I spend more time? Why didn't I say this? Why? My prayer and hope is that you're never ready to let your loved one go, but the quality of time that you spend with that loved one that you have, and every person's different, as you know, Dawn, in their grief. Some family members don't want to be at the bedside. Some family members cannot be at the bedside. Some family members want to remember them before the bedside. Everybody comes with their own set of needs, and that's where the power of the hospice nurse, the chaplain, uh, a trusted spiritual friend who can walk alongside and help listen deeply into where they are and maybe what their needs are, and just being present with them in that pain, having someone to be with you in that pain is
Community.
also so powerful. To
Just
not be
community.
afraid to grieve and hurt is so powerful.
As you said, the community. Don't do it alone because we're not meant to be alone. And I'd like to think of it like when you say stay in the moment. It just kind of hit me. Think of those moments with your dying loved one as precious as the ones with a baby when they're born. Because coming into this world is just as important as going out of the world. And so is everything in between. But if you think about it, because everybody, oh, they want to see the baby. They want to hold the baby. They don't want to miss all the babies first. And so if we to stay in the moment, how about let's not miss their last? And like you said, with no regrets.
But that's something we as humans really, I would
Struggle.
like to say struggle, but aren't exposed to unless we've had a lot of grief just in our own families. But you think about school curriculum and you think about the development, the psychology part of the development of the human, and how much exposure do we really have to how to care for, permission to, all of the grief. And grief happens from the day we're born. I mean, I believe a baby grieves when they don't get what they want, or, they grieve when there's angst in the home. I just believe our systems are are they have this function to grieve, and it all looks different. And tending to grief, no matter if it's a catastrophic injury to just a I didn't get my way, whatever, but it's the seeing of that person and acknowledging their feelings and then helping them move through that. Not saying suck it up, buttercup, move on, but I hear you, that hurts. I'm sorry. How can we move through this now? Um, John Piper has this saying that is really powerful to me. It says, occasionally weep over the life you hoped you would have had. And I think about that. I think about Jessie. Occasionally weep deeply over the life you hoped you would have with her. And so I give myself permission. Grief never goes away. I give myself permission to grieve over Jessie occasionally. Grieve your losses. Give yourself permission to grieve your losses. Then wash your face, get up, trust God, and embrace the life you have. It comes back to, and that's a process. That's not something you can say, okay, now this, I've been grieving now for 15 years, it's a process. But truly, I believe if we tend to the grief that we have inside of us, and that was something I learned in writing that book, was I got in touch with my grief and we became friends. And so when I began to allow my grief to talk to me and to tell me how terrible it felt, and it needed to be heard, and it needed to be held, and it needed to be released, and it needed to be tended to, and once it saw that it has a place in my life and I'm no longer shoving it to the side, it quit being so loud all the time. It quit coming out in places, that I didn't want it to come out in, like rude responses or these harsh responses, because there's resentment or bitterness or anger and fear buried inside of me. But now the grief will come out and it'll go, hey, you want to play? I need to play. And I give it permission. And I'll cry and I'll let it talk, and then it'll be okay again. And so grief is just as important as joy, just as important as excitement, all of it. But we have to tend to those places in our lives. And so I would challenge people to find that grief and spend some time with it, get to know it, and give it permission to come out when it needs to come out and be tended to. Soul care is what I like to call it.
Kind of like give it a chance to be heard. Everyone just wants to be heard. They
Everyone.
want
Everyone, Rumi's house has all these house guests inside of it, all these emotions. Whoever shows up, they just need to be heard, tended to, and then they will take their place in that house.
yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's everyone from a toddler to the elderly. A toddler, they just want you to hear their story. It makes absolutely no sense. They don't expect you to answer. They just want you to hear them.
And I think there's healing in those stories. If you listen and someone is allowed to tell their story, what it is, the grief story, that is such a powerful way to heal grief, is for someone to listen to your grief story.
And that's I had another speaker, Yvonne Heath, and she was a nurse as well. But her thing is just show up. You don't have to talk, because people say they mean well, but sometimes the things you say is just, you shouldn't have said that to a grieving person, and they don't want to hear it. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to just sit there. It's okay to let them, you don't have to talk. Just silence is okay. And that's another big thing. I feel like our society, like you said, it doesn't go and talk about death. They don't want to talk about planning for death or the reality of it. And nobody wants to be silent. Everyone thinks that you have to fill the silence with just randomness, and you don't. Because sometimes I may not want to talk, but I still feel as though I'm being heard if you're sitting there with me. And I think that's definitely something we need to start teaching people, is when to sit down and shut up.
You cannot fix grief, but you can definitely help hold it and hear it. Um, and so that's pretty powerful if you can go in without words and listen to what they need, whether that is silence, whether that is someone holding them, holding their grief with them, witnessing their grief. Sometimes someone just needs someone to witness their pain without comment. Um, it's powerful. Silence is powerful.
And I have definitely learned that with hospice, because there are times that with the families, you want to help, but there's nothing good to say. Oh, hearing, oh, they're in a better place, that's not comforting. Oh, they're not suffering anymore. You're right, but that's still not comforting. They're still gone.
I learned that lesson hard when we had a newborn come home, 2 weeks old, had all kinds of issues, and the mama just wanted the baby to die in the crib, in the baby's room that they had decorated and anticipated for their baby. And she said, I want my baby in her crib. And so, we brought her home, had all the supportive care. The baby passed like 8 hours later, and there is nothing you can say.
Mm-mm.
Nothing. And I remember being in that place in my head going, what can I say? And all I could hear was nothing. What can I say? Nothing. Over and over again, I could hear God say, nothing. Just be there. You heard all she wanted was her baby to be in the nursery in her crib. There's nothing more. You help navigate that. Now just be in the pain with her. And stand by her side as the funeral home comes and picks the baby up. Walk alongside her and hold her up as she goes through the most horrific moments that anybody could ever imagine. And when you see the power of that and the sacred honor of just being there, somehow it puts this imprint on your heart that your words sometimes can cause more grief than just reflective questions or uh, a touch. Touch is powerful, or just sitting there and crying with them. Powerful, but hard, because we humans need to and want to fix and make things better. And we can't. You cannot make that better. Her baby died, period.
It's like it's like being a parent. You can't fix everything for your kids.
I can remember after Jesse's accident, and I had one of my spiritual mentors come. She was close, and she came, and it was like 4 or 5 days after Jess's skull was removed, and there was no hope that she would live. It just didn't make sense that she would live and survive any of that. And she just held me in the chapel while I wailed and I groaned. She just held me. And what strength. She had no words that would help me because there was no help in that awful situation. But she was brave and she just held me and let me cry. And I will never forget that. And there, you remember that people will often forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. She held me like a baby and she made me feel like I was held in the worst moments of my life. And that's the greatest gift we can give to anybody, is to just hold them in the worst moments of their lives. And then to show up afterwards, of course, which everyone did. They kept showing up afterwards, helping in ways. The community had this outreach of helping with meals, helping with the yard, helping with cards and love and prayers and um, support in all kinds of different ways. They just kept showing up because they couldn't fix it, but they could help carry the one in devastation. And that's powerful medicine too for broken hearts.
It's funny when you say that, the carrying, it makes me think of the footprints in the sand. When you only saw one set, I was carrying you.
Yes, the hands and feet of Jesus.
Janet Mills made a comment. She said the effect of her therapy dog had on hospice patients and their families, because dogs need no words. They're simply there.
Yes, Janet Mills is this beautiful human who has a passion for helping healing people. And she had this beautiful dog. His name was Rudy. And she would take him to assisted living centers, nursing homes, the hospice house, to schools where children would read to Rudy. And Rudy was this loving, powerful presence that would help um, people drop their guards, and just relax into the love that Rudy offered. And there is such healing if you can find that way to relax people to where they let their guards down and to receive the love and presence that's there for the healing of one's heart. And Rudy did a beautiful job of that.
Well, it makes me think. I mean, when I'm upset, I want my dog. I want Jasper. He doesn't try to talk to me. He doesn't try to make it better. He just licks my tears off my cheek, and he's just there with me.
He licks your tears off your cheek.
He has.
Oh, we should all be dogs, Dawn. We should all be dogs. Let's be dogs.
But it's true. I mean, and as much as you love friends and family, your dog will never say the wrong thing, or your cat. And I have friends that they'll answer if I call or they'll answer if I text, but they're like, I just don't want to be with people. I just want to be with my pet. I want to be with my cat. I want to be with something that needs me but loves me unconditionally. And that's what animals do. They give you unconditional love and support.
And that's a beautiful tool to have in someone's toolbox, as evidenced by all the pet therapies that go on with our patients, or even the elderly people who are alone and they have a pet companion. Um, Powerful. It's powerful medicine.
It gives them something to live for.
Yes.
I want to circle back around to Jessie. Um, has she had moments of grief or understanding of everything that's happened and who she was versus who she is now?
Her brain injury was to her right frontal lobe. Serious. They took part of her lobe off. And then she had a major contre coup where she had massive throughout her brain, and it changed her awareness. She has little awareness of, the frontal lobe is your administrative, your executive, your ability to process and to plan and to do all the strategic things. Um, Emotionally, she is kind, and she's like living with Jesus. She doesn't have extremes. She is a beautiful, happy girl, probably, I would say, around the age of 13, maybe. She's not mature emotionally. She has not had anger outbursts. She has not had grief outbursts. For years, I used to ask God to please give her tears because she would just show no emotions. Um, and she'll show some tears at Hallmark movies. And so I love for her to watch those movies because I think that stimulates um, emotion for her. She knows what happened to her, but I don't think she remembers her life before. So I don't know that she grieves the loss of her life as it was. And she's not really grieving the loss of her life that could be. She's very present oriented in the moment, as we lived for years in the moment. And she is kind of in the moment. Um, Her memory isn't exceptional. I mean, she's got some good memory, and we're doing things to continue to help her. She's 32 now. We're always doing therapy, trying to help her gain a little bit more, but she truly, for a massively brain injured child who has gone through so many health crises and so many near death experiences, she's living her best life that she possibly can, with the way that her brain was so injured.
Well, I was just thinking how blessed she is to be in the moment and to be not have that worry and not have that stress. Like, I'm kind of envious.
I'm telling you, it's like living with Jesus. Simple, she has a very simple mind, a very good mind, a very loving mind. She says thank you for everything. She has nothing but kind things to say to people. She loves people. She loves everything. Um, I mean, we're so blessed to have such a presence that keeps us accountable in our homes. Like if Bill and I get sharp with each other, she'll go, Dad, why did you say that to Mom? Or she'll go, Mom, why did you say that like that? So pretty sweet. And every morning without fail, she's coming in for breakfast and she's going, now my devotion says, and she'll quote a scripture or she'll quote something, and we'll have a little conversation about what that means. But you talk about a recentering of our hearts with her in our lives. It's beautiful, beautiful gifts.
And that's what more could you ask for with everything? And like you said, stay in the moment. And there's always good somewhere. It may not be great, but there's always some blessing or some teaching, some learning in everything that happens.
And I talk about that in the book, Dawn. It's like people would say, how in the world did you get through that? And I can remember just finding the tiniest little things, good things, like, oh, her blood count stayed stable today, or oh, they didn't have to increase her oxygen, or oh, oh, she moved a finger today. Whatever it was, I would say that's good right there. Oh my gosh. And we would celebrate the good, and that's where I'd find God, and I'd go, there you are, God, in all of this darkness, there's the goodness. And so that's another thing in the book that I talk about is, when you are in crisis and devastation, there's a scripture that says, you think on those things that are good and right and pure and honorable. You think on the things that are good. You find the good in the awful. And that's where God is, because God is good. And if you can focus on those tiny little things of good, it will help escort you or help to guide you through those dark, dark valleys, because there's always tiny little lights, because the darkness never extinguishes the light. And so there's these tiny little lights that will guide you through this valley of darkness. And so you find those, you say, yes, thank you for that. Yes, thank you for that. And you're not looking at all of this awfulness. Oh, yes. And, even at the bedside of our hospice patients, somebody who has bone cancer, who it's mets to the liver and the brain, and they're in a terminal agitation phase. And we finally get enough medication on board where the patient is resting. And I'm like, now this is good. We give thanks for this good. Your mom is resting right now. So right now we're just going to say thank you for this moment right now. But finding, or Johnny got in from wherever he was coming in, and Johnny's here now at Mama's bedside. I'm like, oh, this is so good. Johnny's here, So finding the good in the awful are those moments into which we can be lifted up and carried through that dark, dark, hard that many, many people are asked to journey through.
And it actually touches on, like we were talking before, before this, the psycho-cybernetics book that I've been listening to, audiobook. And you can trick your brain, but your brain can trick you. If you think of nothing but the negative, that's all your brain's going to do. But even if you're getting ready to walk into World War II, you think, I was happy when I was at home eating dinner with my family. I'm going to keep that feeling. And keep that feeling and keep that thought as you walk into the darkness, so that it will light your way. And that's, like you said, finding the good. And I'm like with you, this weekend. And that's what I told them. They was like, well, we shouldn't have done this. We shouldn't have done that. And I said, no, you did what she wanted. She was home. She didn't die at the hospital. She passed at home. And that's what they wanted. And give yourself grace for the things you didn't know. And if you hear my dog, I apologize. I'm not real sure what he's barking at. I have the door shut, but I don't know how much echoes. But yeah, that's beautiful how you could find, like you said, you find the good. Just like, oh, look, oxygen sats stayed above 90 today. Oh, her heart rate didn't go above 85. It didn't go below 60. I always think sometimes, even with me, oh, I got out of bed today.
It's the gratitude that's the medicine for the difficulties through the day. Living a life of gratitude for the tiny little graces and the good and the miracles that we forget because we're immersed in the darkness, the miracles of breath and life and love and support and all the things. I think the posture of where we live is powerful, but it's hard. It's hard to live in that posture when everything is screaming something else, like grief. I think grief screams at you at times because the fear of the loss of the one that is loved and cherished and treasured so deeply, and the anticipatory of the grief. Oh my goodness.
Anger.
It's hard, and there's no right answer, but there are tools that we can gather to put into our toolbox to help. And that's what, this book does, is it really has all these little glimpses of tools within a toolbox of a person whose life is faith-filled, a community that shows up. Our healthcare systems, as broken as they are, they're still good. There is so much good in our healthcare systems. How do we find that good? How do we navigate all of that? And so it's really powerful to have a navigator in your life. If you're someone who can't deal with healthcare, don't know what you're doing in healthcare, don't know about grief, you're fixing to face a big loss, you're going through a devastation. Who in your life can you find that can help you navigate those hard things with tools in a toolbox, and to walk beside you, helping you?
And that's, you're saying tools in the toolbox. I want to be a carpenter to help these people.
I think Jesus was a carpenter, Dawn.
Well,
You think that's coincidence?
that's what we laugh too. I always laugh because everybody's like, "Oh, you're a hospice nurse, you're an angel, you help them get to Jesus." And I always laugh, and I'm like, "No, I don't. I don't do that. God, I help them to the elevator.
You
I
escort
help.
to the threshold.
That's right. I guide them to the elevator. God opens the door, and they've done decided which way they're going." So I'm just a tool to get there. And that's what I hope these talks help anyone and someone that, like you said, there are tools. There are people that can help. There is community. Don't do it alone. There's plenty of usually resources in a community. Well, not always, but if you find the right people, you can find the right resource. But don't do it alone. We weren't meant to be alone.
No.
And that's why there's footprints in the sand. We weren't alone. He carried us. So you just find the person that can carry you. I will ask if anybody has any questions. Janet did comment. She said, "Thank you for the sweet words, Lisa. Bottom line, we don't always need to do when others are grieving. We just need to be there for them."
Beautiful. That's beautiful tool for a toolbox. Yes. And Janet knows that grief so well.
I was just kind of guessing that with the dog. I was gonna guess she knew. She knows a lot of that. I don't see anyone coming off mute or writing, so I definitely want to thank everyone who's came and anyone who's going to watch the replay. I will send a replay out, and if you want to get a hold of me, overabundanceoflight.com is the best place to do it. I do trying to get better at posting things to help give people tools. If anyone would like to reach out to you, Lisa, how would they do that?
I have a website, www.severedsacredness.com. Would love for you to sign up and get connected with me. It shows you how to buy, Amazon has my book, or you can buy the book through the website. I also write blogs occasionally about all kinds of different things that God places upon my heart. But Dawn, I really want to shout you out for doing compassionate conversations about grief and providing people an opportunity to hear and to think and to ask questions and to be immersed in grief. I think it's so important that we not be afraid to talk about grief, and the fact that you're leaning into it. I know you work full time, and yet here you are podcasting, and you're a grief recovery coach. And I just want to take my hat off to you and say thank you for that work, for doing that for people, because as long as there's people on earth, we're going to have grief. And I love the thought of grief in the form of grief recovery. Grief comes, but recovery is a choice and a place into which invitations need to be made, and education and opportunities for people to have their stories heard. And I just thank you for listening to my story. Every time I tell my story, I think I heal a little bit more, because I believe that God takes our deepest, hardest pain, turns it into good, and uses it to heal others. And so that's my prayer for you and your website and your journey and your mission, is all these conversations are uh, anointed or touched by grace and turned into healing power for our people that are grieving on this earth. That's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And thank you for that.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry. I thank you, because telling your story is not easy. And every one of these is, like I said, I get something from it myself.
We all.
And
Mhm.
I definitely, from you, remind me gratitude, because I definitely need to be reminded of that. There's days that all I want to do is cuss and scream and throw things. And then I got to remember, okay, maybe I should be grateful I can express my anger. Whereas a lot of people don't know how.
Right. Or even know they can. My God,
Yes.
permission too. Yeah.
Permission to express anger is a big thing, because that's what I tell people. I said, sometimes just, gosh darn it, you poopy head, that just doesn't work.
Doesn't feel good.
Yeah. And don't do it to hurt anyone, but go in your room, scream in your pillow,
And
right?
did you ever get one of those damn it dolls? Have you seen those little damn it
No, but I remember those.
that damn it doll?
Yeah, I was like, I think we should all get those, or pinatas. Pinatas seem like a really good thing, because you get a prize. So I thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you.
And for everyone that joined, and thank you, Janet, for your precious words. She did say that your book is a beautiful and a most powerful message. It's definitely worth the read. So I'd say everyone needs to go over and get that book.
Thank you, Dawn.
Yep. So I will quit recording now, and if anybody has any questions, we can still stay on for a few minutes. Thanks for joining. I gotta remember where that button is.